All right, so this is a demo for the Solvent-Configr product. You may have gotten the video from some other source, but this is primarily targeted at folks getting the product from the AWS marketplace. So when you get the AWS instance up and running, the first thing you want to do is to spoof to this address. In other words, take your AWS IP and update your local host file to point to this. That's required in order to be able to get initial access to the product. And once you have that, it does come with a self-signed certificate, which you'll have to accept. You can subsequently, of course, log into it and update, replace that with something more appropriate, um, or just proxy to it and using a valid certificate. The very first thing you want to do is to change the default password. It currently comes with a default password. Team admin for both username and password is team admin, as you can see here. You want to change that right away. Um, we're working on ways to prevent default passwords, but for now, that's how it works. All right. It I'm using a version, an instance right now that's running on small AWS instance, which is underpowered for the product. You probably want to start with like a medium instance, which has enough memory to make it faster. If you start with a small instance, it does take a while, really several minutes to load up. And then, of course, when you're actually using the product, you would notice that it's a little uh, on the sluggish side of things, and you'll see it as we go through this. Let's create a folder. I'm going to show you just some basic configuration support. Okay. I will create a folder to create our first object. Let's call it demo object. Accept that. And that creates the object. Let's add a sub object to this and say, call it deployment. You need to do that to make it signify that it's an object. You need to mark it as final. You need to change the type to executable, and you need to actually support it, make it executable. We add that, and that adds the object. Let's add another object, and you can add an object using the menu as well. So let's add a different object, call it production. You can also add a list type object. Let's call this versions. That creates a list instead of a basic object. So let's add some attribute to this. Name, website, we'll just leave this as a string. Let's add ID, call it 5. We'll make this an integer. All right, and for the list, we can add b1.1.0, and that adds an entry there. Let's test this object. In order to test the top level object, or really any of the objects, you want to make it browser accessible by turning that off. It basically just means that you can run it directly in the browser. So let's open this up, and that evaluates the object that we just created. Let's add, say description But this time around, we're going to add something slightly dynamic. Let's say date string. Can, let's say very proud. None of this has any meaning, just a demo. We're going to do a new date. We'll change this to Groovy as the language that we want to use. Anything that's executable has to be final and marked as executable, just like I did before. So we do this like that, and we're going to try to evaluate this object again. And as you can see, it evaluated it and yielded the date string object. So that goes to, if you look at the highlights described of a product, this points to the value, the feature that allows you to inject dynamic capabilities into your configuration without, relying on something like templating. And this works both for object and arrays. Um, Objects are URL addressable, meaning every object in here has an independent URL in effect. The original example that I showed of evaluating the object is from the top level, so that pulls the whole object that we created, the demo object. But suppose I just want to see the production node and everything underneath it. I'll make this browser accessible, and as you can see, it only evaluated that object. So you have a full object graph here, and it's URL addressable. Um, it's fairly flexible. I mentioned hyper navigation. So if this was a large object, you could, you know, open it up in different and you can explore it in a separate tab, basically, right? If we do this, creates another tab, except this time around it's rooted at the deployment object instead of the demo object. So it gives you a great deal of flexibility for how to work with it, especially if you have a complicated structure, a deeply nested structure. Let's download a sample JSON file here just to demo the ability to import JSON and work with it. So I'm gonna put this in here. That downloads it and should give me the option to objectify it, which basically means turn it into an object. I just did that here. If I click on that, it opens it up just like before, right? And just like with the other ones, in order to evaluate this in the browser, I need to disable that security feature to make it browser accessible and run it. And now I could integrate dynamicism into this, right? So here it says ES5. Let's make it plus timestamp just to demo integrated dynamicism. Again, we're gonna do date. So we get the time, and we'll switch this again to Groovy. All right, assuming that's correct, we can evaluate that, and as you can see, it appended it to that value. So that's just um, the tip of the iceberg in terms of what you can do with this product and capabilities. But hopefully, that's enough to give you a sense of what you have at your disposal. It's a highly unique, highly differentiated configuration technology, and we're happy to answer any questions you may have. Just go to the forum and ask your questions there. Thank you.